I've had patients tell me they looked at the milk in their fridge and they saw the expiry date was after when they knew their spouse was going to be dead. That kind of thing will be in people's minds. It's shocking. How can you not? The countdown can be tough. The waiting in that sense can be tough. And then there's that paradox. The waiting is hard, but you don't want it to happen.
Welcome back to If I'm Really Honest, where I seek truth without tribalism. It's a place where ignorance isn't punished, curiosity is rewarded, and conflict doesn't mean contempt. If you're a parent listening with small children, this is probably an episode you want to bookmark for later and skip for now. The same would go for anyone who doesn't feel ready for frank discussions about the end of life. As always, I hope I've brought you someone that you don't fully agree with, and you've brought yourself, so you're way ahead of me on that one. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Stefanie Green, perhaps the most well-known Canadian practitioner of MAiD in the last decade. If you don't know what MAiD is, that's fine. 3 months ago, I didn't either. But now that I've seen it, I can't look away. If you're already familiar with MAiD and you know it to be a complex and nuanced topic, you can probably skip ahead to the interview. But if you're more like me, I feel compelled to contextualize the conversation that you're about to experience. MAiD stands for Medical Aid in Dying. Yeah, it's assisted dying. And this is a beautifully awkward episode for me for many reasons. First of all, I am super biased on the topic. I spent 40 years with a completely certain and completely unexplored black and white opinion on the topic. It was simple. Our holy book said assisted dying is a sin. Well, it didn't actually say that anywhere. But my preferred pastor confidently said that his interpretation of his preferred theologian's interpretation of our preferred translation of our preferred canon of our holy book clearly said that, if you read it right and interpreted it right. And as long as you dismissed all of the contradictory verses as mysteries of God, which I always did because I was a good Christian in a good Christian church. Now, I recently had a good Christian friend who was suffering through what could only be described as a waking nightmare. Enduring what is called a degenerative disease, but degenerative is too sterile a word. It stole every pleasure in life from him and from his family, who had to sit by helplessly and hopelessly and witness it. Minute by excruciating minute. A hellish existence, day after day, week after week, month after month. Eventually, he received drugs from his physician that would end his life. And in a surprisingly beautiful moment of familial love, gratitude, and solidarity, they said their goodbyes and watched him peacefully escape his relentless torture. Now, I only found out about this after it happened. And frankly, I didn't even know that was legal in my country or my state. I live in California. But when I heard about it, I nearly recoiled at how little I recoiled, how untroubled they all were by the choice. I think maybe if you've been there, it makes more sense. They, like me, were all good Christians who agreed with me that it is not our position to take a person's life. And yet, every single family member who experienced this man's torment was supportive of his decision, confident that this was the ethical thing to do. So, I don't know, maybe this was a sin, but if God is half as merciful as everyone in that room, he would forgive it without even being asked. And I know, if you're a Christian, that's a really troubling sentence. But this is exactly the kind of place where I try to wrestle with those troubling questions. So, of course, when I started this podcast and made my list of dream guests, Dr. Stefanie Green was right at the top, since her TED Talks and media appearances on the topic are some of the internet's top results. When she agreed, I made my initial list of questions, and then I started reading her book that defends the practice. Except it didn't defend the practice. It was autobiographical about a woman who loved her practice of delivering babies, and then took the opportunity to explore the burgeoning field of helping people fulfill their final wishes, bringing meaning, hope, and peace to the last days of their lives. It was really kind of startling. I bawled through several chapters of the book, and I'm not the kind of guy that cries over books, especially books I disagree with. She does not paint a simple, rosy picture of the practice, nor defend her line of work. In fact, throughout the book, she recounts the places where she's made mistakes, and what she's learned from courageously navigating a largely unexplored field of reducing suffering. So she doesn't advocate for the practice of MAiD. She just tells the surprising stories of what it's like to work in that field. In fact, when I mistakenly called her a proponent of MAiD, she quickly responded like this.
I consider myself a subject matter expert. I'm a practitioner. I'm a physician who works in the field of assisted dying. I have frontline experience, 9 years of it, and I have a lot to say about what's working, what isn't working, what the patients say to me, what their families say, what it feels like to do this work. I believe I've earned the title of subject matter expert, and I have a lot to comment on. That doesn't mean I'm a proponent or an advocate for the care. I do not go out and position myself as someone who pushes for this or doesn't want this or advocates for law change. That's not my job. That's the job of the legislators and the policy wonks and the advocates. I work with them, I counsel them, I consult with them. They seek my advice as a subject matter expert, and I have a lot to say, but they can then take it and decide how to use it or not. I will work within whatever law our government sets up, and I will suggest that anyone who works in this field work within the law at all times and never not do that. So I don't position myself as an advocate, but merely as a subject matter expert.
So if you're here for a conversation between a person who's calm and reasonable and someone who speaks passionately and impulsively, just be open to the idea that perhaps you have those roles reversed. I am not so measured. I have strong and mixed feelings that ooze out, which is why I'm working on an entirely separate video on a Christian's guide to the topic. So be sure you're subscribed so you get notified when that's released and you can save people from my heresy in the comments section. In addition to being reasonable and considered in her opinions, Dr. Green also embodies my favorite trait, the openness to getting new information and changing her hypotheses. Now, as you know, I hate to ask my guests to rehash their entire books and recent interviews. So we kind of jump into the middle of the conversation here. But in case you're as new to the topic as I was, I'll first give you a few interview questions that I had that she already answered elsewhere. These are not quotes from her, these are just my possible misunderstandings. First of all, how long has this been legal? Well, this isn't a single thing, but in the United States, it dates back to the 1990s. In Canada, it started in 2016. Most other countries are somewhere in that range, but Switzerland does go back to 1942. Next, do MAiD physicians have a requirement to end a life if they're not comfortable with it? No. Physicians are not required to perform actions that they don't feel they can do, either physically, psychologically, emotionally, or spiritually. Does anyone get rejected for the services? Yes. Some Canadian data suggests from 2023 that there were about 20,000 MAiD requests in that year. About 915 were deemed ineligible. Is it soul-crushing to be this close to death all the time? Of course, this depends on the person, but generally it seems like it's deeply meaningful work to the people who do it. What do you do if family members object to a person's procedure? I think the answer is they do the same thing they would do if any person objects to anyone else's procedure. It's not their choice what someone else does with their body. But it does seem like the physicians in MAiD do their best to try to facilitate honest and open discussion among loved ones who disagree. I'll stop there, but seriously, if you have a question we don't address in the interview, it's probably in her book, which isn't just a book of answers, it's a book of stories. And it's beautifully written. So go get the book and then come back here and join me as I jump into a conversation about autonomy, the right to life, and the right to die with dignity. A conversation with Dr. Stefanie Green. First of all, I want to thank you for your book. That was beautiful. That was moving. That was yeah. It was awesome. I haven't cried that consistently through a book in a very, very long time.
Hopefully for some good reasons.
Yes. Well, yeah. I mean, all the deeply dark, painful, beautiful reasons that I mean we're here today.
That's life. Yeah.
So I feel like I'm in a very different place now after having read your book than I was when I was initially interested in talking to you on the topic.
That is the greatest compliment you can give an author, so I'll take that. Thank you.
Right. But I want to also be well representing the Jamin that used to exist, who I think represents a lot of my audience. Maybe if we could back up, because the book was 3 years ago, maybe explain what's changed in the last 3 years. Because I know one of the main things was that they changed the requirement in Canada where you didn't have to prove that death was imminent, essentially. Is there anything else like that that's this kind of transforms the whole thing?
Well, no. I mean, I guess what I would really like your audience to understand, what I want people to really understand, just as a foundational piece of information before we get into the nuances, is just taking a small step back and understanding that assisted dying came to Canada not because voters demanded it, not because any government thought it was a good idea, right? It came through the court system. It came because patients and people and the public wanted to challenge what was a blanket prohibition to assisted dying in Canada. And because it came through the court system, it was argued in a constitutional ways on the basis of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
All right, I think this one is actually really important, but don't forget, I am the piano teacher, not the expert here. But my understanding is like this. There are a lot of ways that we get our laws. In America, our local politicians or legislators can decide, for example, that 75 miles per hour is too fast in a particular area, and so then they'll set the limit to 65 miles per hour. So that's just legislators legislating. But another way that we can get laws is when people make petitions that we call initiatives. Perhaps they're called initiatives because it's people taking initiative to make their own laws. If enough people decide that they want a law, we can vote it into existence. This, by the way, is how we got medical aid in dying in Oregon and California. Enough people wanted it that they were able to vote it into law. Now, there are lots of other ways you can make a law, but the last one I want to point out here is when the Supreme Court makes a decision. If they say, for example, that black people are allowed to vote because that's what our Constitution implies, then black people are allowed to vote, even if the legislators want to make a law that says that they can't, and even if we make an initiative that says that they can't. Ultimately, the Supreme Court gets to decide that those laws aren't valid if they conflict with the Constitution. As I understand it, that's how they got the law in Canada. So the way they view their MAiD is different than the way that we view our MAiD. Because in the United States, we're saying, well, we get to do this thing because we all wanted to do this thing. But in Canada, the attitude is no one's allowed to prevent this person from exercising their rights. Or perhaps more precisely, no one can be punished for assisting someone in exercising these rights. Frankly, as an American in the land of individual liberties, it kind of strikes me that that's a more American position than the one that we have. But either way, it is two fundamentally different ways of looking at this thing.
So it is a rights-based issue in Canada. The patient is at the center of that, and the system and structure has grown out of that. And that's an important difference than other jurisdictions. So we have to keep that in mind when we're talking about assisted dying in Canada. The original Supreme Court decision did not make MAiD a right for Canadians. I think that's a myth that's out there. What it did is it carved out the circumstances under which, if these were true, then if someone offered and provided an assisted death, it would no longer be considered a criminal event. And in doing so, it actually defined what those criteria were. We often refer to it as the Carter criteria because it was the Carter court case. And it simply said if the patient was an adult, over 18, competent and capable to make their own healthcare decisions, suffering from a grievous and irremediable condition in a way that they deemed was intolerable and couldn't be relieved, then those were the situations, that was the criteria under which if they asked for an assisted death and it was received, then it would no longer be a criminal event. What's important in understanding that basis is that nowhere in that Supreme Court decision, based on the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, did it say that you had to be near end of death. It didn't say you had to have a terminal illness. It didn't say if you had blue eyes, you couldn't get MAiD. It didn't exclude. It said what needed to be true. And that is really important as we get into the nuances. Because what the government did is they took that decision and rather than putting it into legislation, they crafted legislation that was more restrictive than that and added an element that required a relationship with end of life. It added a requirement that said your death needed to be reasonably foreseeable. And we can get into what that means, but that's like the topic of an entire weekend conference. But it required some sort of trajectory towards death in order to be qualified for MAiD. And the day that they did that, that was challenged through another court case. What's important, what's changed since my book was published around that time, is that that court case was settled in 2019. And in 2021, the federal government opened the MAiD legislation, which is federal in Canada, and for the first and only time amended it by removing that criteria, but also adding in a few other things that we've learned along the way. And we can get into what those are. So when we talk about what's changed since my book, well, that criteria has been lifted out. The requirement to fulfill procedural safeguards that have now shifted and changed has happened. So now it's essentially two pathways towards MAiD, what we fondly call track 1 and track 2. And track 1 is for patients whose, unfortunately, they use the same term, If your death is reasonably foreseeable, you go down track 1, and you have to meet certain procedural safeguards. And if your death is not reasonably foreseeable, whatever that means, you go down track 2 and have to meet all the track 1 safeguards plus these 5 other new safeguards as well.
All right, maybe you can see me biting my tongue right here because in order to stay on the topic, I didn't derail the conversation, but maybe in a future conversation with Dr. Green. I'll go into more detail on the video that I make on the topic that's focused on me instead of on my guest. But for context, I wanted to add in here that it would have felt simple and obvious and intuitive to me that a person shouldn't be allowed to end their life unless they're at the end of a terminal illness. But of course, I'm currently at the end of a terminal illness, as are you. In the relatively near future, we're going to be dying of the complications from being alive, which is just one of the many, many reasons that the term reasonably foreseeable death is not as clear-cut as it would have initially seemed to me.
And they've also added some exceptions to the requirement of providing final consent at the moment of the death itself, immediately prior to the medication being administered. There's now 2 exceptions to that requirement that have been added with that amendment as well. So those are the big changes that have happened in the last few years.
Yeah, that last one seems huge, and that's because if you asked for it and then your illness degenerated to the point that you were not able to give your final consent, your previous consent still holds. Is that the idea?
That's kind of the essence of it. I think it's easiest to understand if you understand where this came from, and it's really just telling the story of a woman named Audrey Parker, who was a 57-year-old woman from Nova Scotia who had metastatic breast cancer and did all the things that required for her to do to try to treat that. And at some point, she realized she was dying and was receiving supportive palliative care and very much wanted to have an assisted death when the time came. So she actually applied for assisted dying. She was assessed and found fully eligible for an assisted death and was planning her death kind of early in the next new year. She very much wanted to live through the holiday season, and that was her plan. But unfortunately, her illness progressed and began to appear in her brain, and her doctors told her she probably wouldn't have consent, the ability to give consent for this procedure if she waited that long. And she felt that was unfair. Here she was, already approved, already, had been given permission. And they gave her what was really essentially a cruel choice. You can either die now with an assisted death, being in total control, or you could wait, hopefully make it and still have the ability to give consent. But if you lose it, we're not going to abandon you. We're going to support you and give you a good palliative natural death, but it just won't be with MAiD. It won't be with an assisted death. And she felt that was unfair. She chose to die early, actually, so she could be in control. But that advocacy that came out of her story, which became a kind of a national story that people really paid attention to, this was created for that. So when we think about who this waiver of final consent, as we call it, is applied to, we think of Audrey Parker and that situation when the illness might rob you of your consent, or even medications. A lot of patients we were seeing were refusing to take their pain medications near the end because they thought it was going to cloud their mind, and that was such a cruel thing to be doing. This allows people to now to treat themselves as fully and as comfortably as possible so that they don't have to make that decision.
Well, in that case, I was not aware of the story of Audrey. In that case, she was not the one who shortened her life as much as the government was the one that shortened her life.
Yeah, the government would say that she chose to shorten her life in order to stay in control. I think there's an argument to be made that the government forced her to make that decision, which was unfair and somewhat cruel. Yeah.
Right. Wow. I mean, I feel like even someone who was against, especially someone who was against MAiD, would want them to have all of the time possible to change their mind and not be forced to make a decision early.
Well, as an interesting tangent, Jamin, I have to tell you the Carter decision in Canada that kind of got all this possible, the argument that was made was actually about the right to life. Interestingly, because it was felt that patients like Kay Carter and Gloria Taylor, who were arguing this case, that they were being forced to end their lives earlier because they wouldn't have the physical ability to seek help later on, and that in fact it was against their right to life as long as they could live it. That if they were actually granted the opportunity for an assisted death, they would actually live a longer life. So very, very similar in that sense. Yeah.
Okay, so then I'm very puzzled by the inability to give whatever I forget what the term is.
It's called an advance request.
Thank you.
And that's before you're fully eligible. So in Audrey Parker's case, of course, she was fully eligible already. So a very specific subset of patients. An advance request is before you're fully eligible, before you're in an advanced state of decline, before you're suffering intolerably. Typically, we think of patients with dementia, new diagnosis. And they say, when A and B and C become true, when I don't recognize my family, when I can't feed myself, when I become violent at night, I would like to have an assisted death. That's an advance request. That is not currently legal in Canada. There's a strong desire by the public to see that legalized in Canada. There is one province, actually, that now allows it in the province of Quebec. Since October of 2023, this has been possible. So we may or may not see law reform in Canada to allow for that. But right now, it is not in discussion.
So then, with Canadian laws, are you able to make that request in Quebec and then have your family transport you there for that? Like, is there a tourism death?
That's a good question. I mean, that hasn't happened yet, to my knowledge. I am aware of over 200 advance requests that have been written in Quebec. The first third of them were sent back to the docs and the patients saying they weren't adequately written. There's a lot of learning going on right now. This is still very, very new. I am aware of one case having gone through and actually receiving an assisted death under an advance request, but we haven't heard about it yet publicly. So I think we're going to learn a lot from Quebec's experience, but check back in a year or two. I'll have more information.
Yeah. I have to keep remembering how very young this industry is. So in your book, there were dates as far back as like the 90s for some countries and some states. Is that right? In Oregon?
That's correct. Yeah, Oregon was the first state in the United States, passed legislation, I think, in 94, but became possible operational in 97, I believe.
Okay.
And then, of course, we saw Washington State and others jump on after.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah. I mean, that seems like a long time ago, but not in the span of our species dealing with this issue, I guess. Like 30 years, we should still be working out some kinks, to be fair.
We're still working out some kinks. Interesting, though. I mean, Canadians, we all think of it as very, very new, and it is. It's been just under 10 years now. But on the flip side, we have 9 years of data. So we've got some good data coming in, some good evidence. We've got some information we can work on as we move forward.
Are there other countries that you see parts of the way that they do it that you think is better than Canada's, and what do you think are the countries that are doing it worst or most dangerously?
Well, you'll excuse me for saying I think what's happening in the United States is not better. I will go with worse, and I would say parts of it are dangerous. That might be controversial, but I think what's happening in the U.S. is I'm going to make a lot of enemies. I think what's happening is a step in the right direction, and I applaud the effort from the 90s. They are definitely leaders, and I understand that the laws were passed at that stage, finding a balance between what was acceptable and what was not. I mean, you had to make concessions. In places like Oregon and Washington and Vermont and Maine, you have a law that requires the patient to be terminally ill. That means that somebody has said that they're likely to die within 6 months. And I understand that was a concession really that was made early on to allow legislators to get behind it. But that is a really difficult prognostication. Evidence shows that we're really bad at doing that. We're often wrong when we do that. And I think it ignores the central tenet of suffering, which is really more the basis of the Canadian model, whereas someone can be suffering intolerably without being within 6 months of the end of their life. And so I think to exclude a whole cohort of patients that you probably are meaning to be helping is I wouldn't say short-sighted, but I say at this point, 30 years later, we know better. And also, I think in the United States, as in several other jurisdictions in the world, in the U.S., you can only have patients self-administer the medication. They have to do it themselves. That is actually discriminatory for people with physical disabilities, even before their illness, let alone with their illness. If anything along their GI tract, from their mouth to their throat, to their esophagus, to their stomach, to their gut, if something's not working, and we can list off the cancers that can do that, they can't. It won't work. So that seems short-sighted. Countries like the Netherlands and Canada and I think Spain and parts of Australia, I mean, clinicians can administer the medications through intravenous. That seems a more compassionate route for certain patients. And we know from all of those countries that patients actually prefer that. So why is that not being allowed? I don't understand that in the U.S. So I think there are lessons that can be learned, and I hope that they are learned. I think like I said, we have good data, we have good experience, we have good models out there, and we we in Canada learned a lot from the Dutch, from the Europeans, even from the Americans who went before us. We were able to learn what worked and what didn't work, and therefore make our model, which I think now is at the forefront because of all that learning.
So just to clarify for the viewers, the law in the United States is that you have, like you said, you have to administer your own. It's a liquid, right? And so then if you it just seems so obviously cruel for someone to say, well, I've got a condition which makes me not able to swallow things, so I would like to not die. And the government says, no problem. All you have to do is swallow this thing and you're fine.
It doesn't really make sense. I mean, there are ways and workarounds that people have been trying very hard to do. You know, in California, for example, the law actually used the words ingest, which generally means, you know, swallow something. But, you know, you could easily argue, and it has been argued, as long as you're using the GI tract in some way. So some people have been using feeding tubes, and they've been able to do that successfully on their own. Some people have used rectal tubes and been able to do that on their own. So there's like creative ways, but these are all difficult, non-comfortable, perhaps not dignified methods that really don't seem necessary to have to mandate.
Right. And again, if your GI tract doesn't work like that, it'd be like saying, if you're blind, you have to look at this thing in order to get permission for this. Like, well, what about all the blind people? Like that, it seems insane. Okay, so then what are the parts from other countries that you would like to see borrowed in your country, or who's on the leading edge of some of the more humane applications of this stuff?
I do think we're on the leading edge. I think that we still have a lot to learn from our European colleagues, from the Dutch especially. They do allow, in certain circumstances, advance requests, and we don't yet do that. So I think what we need to do is study their system, what has worked, what has not worked, what they've done for the tricky things around it. I think it's very tricky. I don't think it's an easy thing to do, but I think that just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not possible. So I'd like to see Canada learn from that. That's probably the number one issue on Canadians' minds, and the best model for us to learn from.
Okay, so then a couple areas that seem tricky to me: the 18-year-old requirement, and also the mental health component. I have a hard time with both of those. What's that?
Yeah, let's dig in. So currently in Canada, you have to be 18 years of age. There is no discussion going on about changing that. There have been reports suggesting that that is an arbitrary line and maybe shouldn't be there. There are reports suggesting the government should be investigating and researching how to change that. We already have doctrine in Canada where people who are under 18 but have been able to prove that they have the capacity to make their own healthcare decisions, we call them mature minors, can and do make life-altering decisions for themselves. They may be involved in decisions about whether they will or won't accept blood products. They may be involved in whether they will or won't accept certain aggressive chemotherapies. They have an ability to do that because they have been able to prove that they have the capacity to make those kinds of decisions, usually in conjunction with their parents and the healthcare team. I think it is an arbitrary line to draw at 18. I think the argument could seriously be made that we already have this. Why aren't we applying it to assisted dying as well? Why are we not permitting that? Obviously, a very sensitive topic. Nobody's interested in eagerly pursuing this for children. It would be incredibly rare that this would come up, but it's also not hard to imagine the case where a 17-year-old has a horrible cancer that is causing incredible suffering, and they and their family and their healthcare team have decided that this might be the best option for them versus making them unconscious for a couple days, weeks, whatever, while they're dying a natural death. And so I think that discussion will probably come in Canada, and I expect it'll be emotional, but probably in the end, the logic and the law will win out. We have precedent for that. It's not happening right now, but I do expect it will come one day. The issue with patients with mental health disorders is much more.
Can we go back to the 18-year-old thing before we switch gears? It's shocking to me that hasn't come up. It seems like it would take, like, if my 17-year-old was in that situation and I was pro MAiD, it feels like me and whoever I could get with me would start a revolution. Like, this needs to be a major issue. And like on down, I mean, 17 is like 9, 7, 6, like I don't understand again, 18 is an arbitrary number in my mind, made up by government in order to be able to get young men to fight in their wars. Like if we're going to do something that has to do with like your own autonomy, like let's pick 25, because 25 is at least when your brain is,
Your frontal lobes are there, yeah.
Yes, right. Like, but 18 is like just a ridiculous number to me. So the fact that we would put it there, and then the fact that we will want this to be only for adults, when, as you're saying, like if a minor can have chemotherapy, or they can transition to another sex, or like it's endless what a minor can do with parental consent, except for this thing which might reduce their suffering. Again, if you're in favor of it, I don't see how you stop at 18.
Yeah, I don't think there's a good argument for it stopping at 18, but I do think that there's an argument for saying we need to do this, carefully and cautiously as we begin. It is relatively new. Let's start with the things that we understand and are clear, and for adults that we can all kind of learn from. Now we're 10 years in, maybe we should be looking at this topic. I think your point to, if it was your kid and they were 15 or 17 or whatever, and you'd start a revolution, is exactly how this happened in Canada. This didn't come through government. This came through patients demanding their rights. I think the day will come when a 17-year-old and their family will step forward and want to fight this. But like I said, this was very, very rare. This is not a common event. And in that situation, these patients do not want to spend their last few weeks and months in court fighting for things. So, there's no rush. All in due time. Maybe right now there's many things on the political docket. This is not front and center. So it will come when someone wants to start a personal revolution through the courts. That's probably how it's going to happen.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a small number, but it's a small percentage, but it's a huge number, and the percentage is 100% when it's me. So
yes, that's exactly true. And again, there are, our colleagues in Europe do allow this. So again, we have places to look, we have models to look at, we have data to look at. How often does it happen? What happens to them? What kinds of situations come up? What diagnoses are involved? Were the parents involved? Where were the arguments? So lots to learn.
Sure, fair enough. It seems very measured. I feel like that is one of the most misunderstood parts of the industry. Is that okay? I don't know if industry seems like a field.
I would call it healthcare.
Okay, cool.
This new field of care.
Yes. Is that like this is about like trying to exterminate people, or like and it's about death, when really, as you say many times in your book and here in this interview, it's really about life. And whether or not I'm not even. I don't know that I've got the right answers, or that my opinions are right or good. But like, if you believe in that, it's certainly not. I haven't run into proponents of MAiD who are in it for anything except for empathetic and compassionate reasons.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement. I don't know anybody who doesn't fit that description who's involved in this work. You have to be a certain type of person to be in this work, for sure.
Okay, so then if we can switch then to the mental health issue, because that feels much stickier to me.
Yeah. I think, I mean, it's a really interesting topic. I'm glad that I sketched out earlier. We do need to understand that our courts did not exclude those with mental health disorders from accessing this. The initial law did not exclude them either, but because the initial law required a reasonably foreseeable death, patients with mental health disorders basically couldn't get through that gate. They couldn't argue because they had serious bipolar disease that they were going to be dying, so they couldn't really get through. There are some examples that we've had, but we're not going to get into the fringe. Once that requirement was lifted out of the law, the government realized, patients with mental health disorders might now have access, and clamped down and did the exclusion. So, every article you'll read about Canada talks about the expansion of MAiD. In fact, we're talking about the restoration of the rights of those with mental health disorders to achieve once more the same rights of other Canadians.
Real quick here, for all of the Americans like former me, I would like to point out that this is the exact same semantic argument that we have surrounding American rights as well. One side said, if we keep expanding the rights of who can vote to black people and to women, then before you know it, our dogs will be voting, and then they're going to vote in a dog president. But of course, the other side says this is not an expansion of the Constitution. It's just a necessary restoration of the Constitution for people who have so far been denied their constitutional rights. And we have to grant them those rights, even if it means the presidency is occupied by someone who you think dishonors the title, like a woman or a non-white.
And from that lens, and I think that's a fair lens, this is a discriminatory exclusion against someone based on their medical diagnosis. Now, that said, mental health disorders can be challenging. They often affect someone's mental state, right? And they can easily, though not always, but they can sometimes affect someone's capacity to make their own decisions for themselves. And in those circumstances, of course, they couldn't be allowed to have access to MAiD. I think the arguments for people with mental health disorders accessing MAiD are fairly strong in that we're already dealing with the exact same issues with other patients that do currently have access. It's not just patients with mental health disorders that struggle with their capacity to make this decision. I see patients all the time who are struggling with capacity, and if they don't have it, they don't get through, irrelevant of what their diagnosis is. We see patients who were not clear whether their illness is incurable or not. There's been a lot of talk of, are mental health disorders curable? Are they incurable? I don't know if I have the answer to that question. I would need to have the answer to that question to allow someone with a mental health disorder to get through the gates to access MAiD. But I'm already struggling with patients with physical disorders that I don't understand well, that the experts don't understand well. Let's talk about long COVID. Is that curable or incurable? I don't know. If I don't know, that patient won't be able to access MAiD. If I do know, then maybe they'll meet that gate. But what I'm saying is the same issues we already have 9 years experience with. So why are we discriminating against this particular group? I think there's lots of stigma. I think it's old, long-standing stigma against this population. And I think that's unfair. Having said that, do I look forward to the day when this is possible? No. As a practitioner, this will be extremely difficult for me. Extremely difficult to parse out these issues on complicated stories with many layers. I'll certainly need very good documentation over a very long period of time to be able to try to establish whether they meet criteria. A significant amount of these patients will not have that. They simply won't be able to access MAiD because I cannot form a medical opinion. But for a few, I can imagine that is possible. The two people that are currently challenging the exclusion in the courts in Ontario are prime examples of patients with decades of history of treatment and documentation of trials that have failed. They are treatment resistant, we'll say. And they are suffering intolerably, and they very much would like to access this care. So I can imagine patients that would meet the criteria. And I think for the very few that they are, I think our law should allow for that. But it's not for me to say that. I'm not here to propose that. I'm here to say I will work within whatever law our government decides is the right law. And I will decide then whether I'm comfortable working with this patient population. I will also add, though, I mean, I have had multiple patients with significant mental health disorders who had comorbid physical illness. That bipolar patient with lung cancer, if their bipolar disease, if their mental state is clear and they're able to make capable decisions, their lung cancer can make them eligible for MAiD, and they have been found eligible, and they are, in fact, accessing MAiD. So there's a lot of crossover that's already happening, and I think we need to keep that in mind.
So then for me, with the mental health thing, because I don't think my perspective on the spectrum of mental health is probably as wide as it is, which is maybe the greatest understatement of the conversation so far. But I know that a lot of people that I know, including myself, who have struggled with, we'll say, mental health problems, that resolves a lot of times. And then you're glad that you weren't able to go through the things that you wanted to go through with.
But that's a really important point, because I think there's this misunderstanding that a 25-year-old who broke up with their partner could apply for MAiD. That's utter bunk, right? In order to be eligible, you have to meet all those criteria. You have to have a serious and incurable illness, disease, or disability. You can't say something's incurable until you've tried to treat it. And you need to try to treat it over long term. So, you need decades of treatment.
And I agree with that for everybody else. And I agree with that, like from a government perspective, and for being responsible for whether or not I was participating in the end of this person's life. As an individual, it's not like those people are not, the people who really want to end their life are not ending their lives anyway. And the way in which they are forced to do it without access to cleaner ways that I think most of them would prefer.
Yes, you're dancing around the topic. Let's use the words. There are people who are still committing suicide because of their mental health disorders or because of reasons other than their mental health disorders. And that is still something that people will continue to do, whether this is offered or not. I certainly am aware of patients who've been turned down for MAiD, who have gone and done that. I think that's unfortunate. I think that we need to also put things in perspective. MAiD hasn't been here for centuries. It is new. It cannot help everybody in every situation. There are people who are validly suffering who do not qualify under our law. And one of the hardest things I do is to tell patients that they're ineligible. And they're sitting in my office asking me to end their life. They are suffering. I need to validate that. I need to explain that I believe them, that I'm not doubting them, what they're experiencing, but the law ties my hand. I cannot help everybody who walks into my office. I still need to abide by the law, and that will always be the case, whether we allow people with mental health disorders to access this care or not. And so it will be tricky. I do expect we'll get 100 people applying for every one that might be eligible with that type of diagnosis.
I have questions about your own personal relationship with the end of life. If you're anxious about the end of your own life.
I'm not yet. I'm in that nice fuzzy phase where I'm still feeling relatively immortal. Not really true. That's not
sure.
true. I would say that it took me. Before I started doing this work, I don't think I thought about my mortality very much, and I think that's true of many people. I think that doing this work has made me come face to face with it, and I still think, despite that, it took me probably 2 real years of doing this work before I sat down with my partner and I said, "Hey, let's actually talk about what would be important to us, what would be important to me, what would be important to you, what would we want." And so it's easy to say and hard to do. I don't think that I'm fearful of death. I think that I would be sad. I love life. I have people I want to live for and people I want to interact with, and I want to eat it all up. I want to live a long time and a healthy time, and I want to participate in this planet. I'd hate to leave it. That's really, for me, that's more my concern these days than the actual death itself.
Do you believe in an afterlife?
I don't actually. I wish that I did. I grew up in a traditional household where I certainly might have. As an adult, I cannot intellectually do that. I'm really open to the idea that I'm wrong. I'd be happy to be proven wrong. I think that would be great. But if you ask me to give you an answer, I do think this is it.
To what extent is the assisted dying process a service to the patient, and to what extent is it a service to the family?
I think primarily it's a service to the patient. It's positioned as such in our law. It's positioned as such in my mind. It's positioned as such kind of in my ethical framework. The patient is the center of all of this. So this is a service for the patient, and my care is for the patient. I see, it's interesting, on the day of the death itself, almost always I see patients who are calm. I ask them all how they slept the night before. 9.9 out of 10 will tell me they had a great sleep, that they are ready, they want this to go ahead. Is it already time? They're glad I'm here. They say things like that to me. They're really settled, confident, and adamant. The families are sometimes falling apart in that moment. They know it's been coming. They've had anticipatory grief for a while. They are not coping as well as the patient most of the time. Now, some are. They're just, the spouse of 50-something years, they are 100% behind it, even though they are broken up and destroyed by what's about to happen. They also really, really want what's best for their loved one. So I think we see a mixed reaction in the families. I think that, we weren't great at supporting the families the first couple of years. We were very focused on making sure we had the support for patients. We now know the families need more, and they are getting it. We have better resources. But we see a real roller coaster of emotions. There is relief. They literally see the patient stop suffering when I give the first sedative, right? The patient relaxes. They feel good. They don't have symptoms anymore. There's relief. And then there's an immediate guilt for feeling that relief. Should I have done more? Could I have done more? Did I wait too long? Are we really doing the right thing? There's this kind of chaotic, less pleasant emotion that I think people go through. And then we debrief afterwards. We talk about what happened and how it went and what they saw and how they feel about that. And they start to process these emotions. And they will continue, as any grief process, to roil through various emotions at various times. The vast majority of families and loved ones come to a place where they're very glad they've been able to support their loved one. They feel it was the right thing for them. It's altruistic for them. They've put their loved one's needs and wishes above their own, and they feel like they've given them a gift. And I think that they have. There's obviously going to be a few where that's not the case.
So, how long does it take for the beginning from the first to I think it's the third of the injections, right?
There's actually potential for 4. I use 4 medications routinely. One of them is pretty optional, but I use it all the time. The standard time from first injection to end of heartbeat, so, is in British Columbia, where I work, the average is between 7 and 10 minutes.
That's a lot of emotions to go through for the family in basically zero time, it feels like.
Yeah, it can seem very, very quick in that time space. I've had some people tell me it feels very, very long. They were expecting it to be immediate, which it's not. So I think it just depends on your perspective in that day. Most people are processing the emotions more so afterwards than in the moment because they're in the moment at the moment.
So then, what kind of services does the family need? Like, what would you recommend for someone who's gonna go through this, and what would you tell the family to line up?
Number 1 is preparation. I think transparency in work is important. I spend quite a bit of time counseling patients and families what to expect, what it's going to look like. I'm going to arrive, who's going to be with me, how long it's going to take, who I'm going to speak to first, what I'm going to do next. Like prepare them, tell them exactly what's going to happen, what it's going to look like. I go over that when I'm there with them as well. Preparation is, I think, very, very important. When people are surprised or something happens they don't expect, that is jarring. And that is the thing they're going to think about later, and that's what they're going to perseverate on. So preparation, preparation, preparation. That said, I think there's ways to prepare them that the practitioner can do. I think there are good counseling services that can also help people now that we have experience with MAiD and they know how to prepare people. But more so than that, there are now at least 2 national organizations in Canada that have people, volunteers with lived experience who've been through it, who kind of walk with people if they're interested and kind of connect with them and share their own experiences and let them talk about their feelings and kind of emotionally prepare for what's coming and to be confirmed that what they're experiencing they're not the only person who's ever experienced this, that they're not alone, that it's okay to feel this way. Though that kind of preparation is really important. And of course, similarly, afterwards, you need all of that same support. I'm not able to support every family and loved one afterwards in terms of counseling. I can't take that on. But these support agencies, these national support services for people who have supported people going through an assisted death are now robust, and they offer long-term ongoing support for people. And I think that's exactly what they need. They need peer support, and that's what they can get.
Right. And then are those services available to people who are not have not used MAiD? Like, it seems like it's going to be a very similar need regardless of the method of death.
So for people who've not gone through the assisted dying process, there are grief counselors, lots of bereavement programs that have been, formed for decades that are in place in most cities. I'm talking specifically about ones that are, and anyone who's been through MAiD can use those. In fact, we offer like the hospice counseling program here in Victoria. We'll see anybody who's lost a loved one, whether they've been involved with hospice or not. But we have MAiD specific support programs, which I think for many people who've been through MAiD are even better.
So in what ways is it unique?
I think the anticipatory grief beforehand is quite unique, especially once a date has been set. There's a certain amount of countdown that's happening that you just don't know if you're not having an assisted death. I've had patients tell me they looked at the milk in their fridge and they saw the expired date was after when they knew their spouse was going to be dead. That kind of thing will be in people's minds. It's shocking. How can you not? The countdown can be tough. The waiting in that sense can be tough. And then there's that paradox. The waiting is hard, but you don't want it to happen. Right? There's a lot of paradox in this work. I think that's really different. I think afterwards, depending on how the experience went, how best prepared they were and how it was handled and how they were able to be involved in the death itself can lead to a very smooth, in quotes, whatever a smooth grief process is versus a complicated grief experience. So I think the potential for more complication is there, but we're not actually seeing that. If we look at the evidence, we're not seeing more complicated grief, but I think the potential is there if we're not careful.
So then, I don't know how it is in Canada. At least here, we are extremely separated from death and suffering. Like, that all happens in a building, and we don't deal with any of that stuff out here. So I feel like the current American citizen has a very different relationship with death than even 100 years ago American does. But then I feel like your line of work is like another step deeper into that rabbit hole how would you, if just a regular person went into your field of work, in what ways would you expect their perspective and worldview and mindset to change?
I talk about the difference over 100 years in my TED Talk, actually. I think you're bang on. It's radically different. And it's not so different in Canada than the States in that sense, although now that we've been talking about assisted dying for 10 years, it's much more normalized to talk about death and dying and end-of-life options. So we have that advantage. Your question is interesting because if someone just walked into this line of work, you can't just walk into this line of work. Of course, you have to be either a medical practitioner or a nurse practitioner. And so it's a certain subset of the population that has already been exposed to death and dying and end of life. Even in my career in maternity, of course, I was still exposed to that. So not foreign to this. Most of the people that do this work have been exposed to a career full of people dying in certain ways. And it's what draws many people into the work is that they've seen some less than good experiences and they want to make it better. So I think that it's a biased sample. Actually, whoever enters this work is probably already more comfortable with death and dying than maybe the average citizen. I think that we are quite people would maybe disagree with me. Certainly where I work, we are very lucky. We have outstanding palliative care. We use the terms a little bit differently in our countries. We talk about palliative care as all of end-of-life options. It's a kind of an approach to care, comfort care, supportive care, and hospice is a piece of that where there's a physical building that people can go. I think you talk about hospice care kind of as that more whole.
People like me don't talk about it at all. So, yeah.
Well, we've been talking about it a little bit for a long time, and we've been talking a lot about it for the last decade, maybe a little bit longer. And I think that, interestingly, the on the tail of the discussion of assisted dying, on the debate about assisted dying, on the reports and the committees and the government things and all the opponents, all of that has brought the topic of palliative and hospice care into the mainstream. It's on the coattails, of course, because there was originally quite a bit of discomfort from those within I'll say the palliative care community who were hesitant, to be diplomatic, I'll say opposed, in the beginning when we started talking about assisted dying. We have seen a significant transformation in the decade where, again, not because I've knocked on their door and said, hey, we need to have good palliative care for these patients. These are palliative patients. We have a common patient. These are patients who are at end of life. Our law requires them to be offered a palliative care. They are receiving palliative care. They are getting excellent palliative care. When these patients look at their palliative care doctor and ask for information and help for assisted dying, I have found these clinicians who once said, I will never be involved in that work, are now drawn into it by their patients. It's the patients that drag the system into it and have dragged their practitioners and have dragged whole units and facilities into this work because palliative care physicians are, in fact, the most patient-centered physicians I know. I apologize to my other colleagues, but of course they are. And so they really respect autonomy and they really respect wanting what patients want. And how could they not look at this? This is covered legal care. So I think that those conversations around palliative care have become much more robust. We see more people accessing palliative care. We see more funding for palliative care. We see more funding for palliative care research. We've seen the most dramatic increase in utilization of palliative care in Canadian history since this law passed. And I think it's not a coincidence.
Yeah, well, and it was fascinating to me. I didn't know before reading your book that you had the prior career in newborn delivery, and so that you have seen the most intimate parts of life on all ends, perhaps more than most, by far more than most humans on the planet, maybe more than anybody else. It seems like. Yeah. You talk in your book a little bit about kind of the similarities between those two as far as them being passage points, one bringing life in and then the other ushering it out. What are some of the ways that you were surprised that perhaps in the difference, like going from that thing to that thing, what was most jarring?
I think what was most jarring was how similar they were. I mean, I'm going to twist this. I didn't see that coming until I started. I thank you for noticing. I feel like probably the most privileged doctor on the planet. I have been invited into these very intimate moments with patients when they're having babies, when they're leaving life. I mean, it's an incredible experience I could talk a lot about. how amazing that has been for me to be able to witness these experiences. I had a passion for newborn care, maternity and newborn care. I spent a career in it, 22 years. I really, really loved it, and I'm arrogant enough to tell you I think I got pretty good at it. Um, I never thought anything else I could do would ever come close to that. I was a little bit sad to some extent to leave that, although I was pulled towards this. Um, I was a little jarred by how similar the skill set is. It's the skill set that's the same. It's one of the most important days in someone's life, very, very emotional, quite intense, lots of family dynamic happening. And my role is not to be the most important person in the room, right? I'm there to choreograph this natural event that's happening for this very important family unit and to be a knowledgeable guide through that, to help them prepare for that, to help them through it, to help them when it gets complicated, to put that baby on the chest at the end, to pronounce someone dead at the end, to kind of get to that final climactic moment and then not be the center of attention, move away, respectfully withdraw, allow that family to celebrate the birth of their child, allow the family to grieve the loss of their loved one. And to do that well is an art, I think. And I was able to hone that over 22 years and to take that skill set and move it into the end of life. I was quite jarred at how it was the same skill set. I was like, wow, I might be able to do this. And I might be able to do it kind of well. So that's great. It really helped me stay in it. That, for me, was the most jarring thing.
That's interesting. As a non-doctor piano teacher who does neither of those things, it seems to me like the delivery room, things usually, in most cases, have a happy ending.
Yes.
And there is more leeway. There's fewer ways to mess it up. Like, you got a beautiful baby, have a great day, everyone's happy, I win, you win, everybody wins. And the other one, basically 100% of the time, it is they're yeah, right.
But I think that we need to keep in mind that as strange as this might sound, the death of that patient in that moment, in that way, in that time, in that place, is a win for the patient. They've asked for it, they've fought for it, they've planned for it, they've requested it, they've followed all the rules to get it, and then they got it. That is what I see as a dying person's wish. And if I'm able to facilitate a dying person's wish, that's a win.
Yeah.
So it is a death. It is someone's end of life. It is extremely sad, and it can be catastrophically so for when they're young or when there's children left behind. There's lots of reasons why it is gut-wrenching. But it is also a dying person's wish.
Yeah, you've got the story in your book where in that one, it was the whole family was gathered. It was a kind of a young mother.
The rest of us gathered around Liz, and I asked if she was ready to begin. Now? I heard the daughter ask from behind me. I turned. I had seen a variety of tokens of love handed to, held by, or worn by the dying person. This day, Liz's 11-year-old daughter left her father's embrace and broke through our circle to approach her mother for the last time. She solemnly showed her a hand-painted, heart-shaped pendant that looked like they may have made it together. She ceremoniously kissed it and placed it gently to Liz's lips for the same, and then she put it in Liz's left palm. Liz mouthed, "I love you," to her daughter, closed her fingers around the pendant, brought it to her chest, and closed her eyes. As she smiled, a single tear escaped the side of her eye, and the girl returned to her father's embrace. Then I made a cardinal mistake. Wanting to contribute in some way to the solemnity of the moment, I remarked out loud how lucky Liz was to have such a loving and supportive family. I instantly realized I had hit a nerve when Liz's teary-faced 15-year-old son angrily spat out that nothing about his mother's circumstance could ever be considered lucky. Fair enough. I nodded agreement in his direction, but he buried his face in his father's shoulder. "Please," it was Liz, "let's begin." I asked her for her last words, and she smiled. She wished everyone love and to have love. A young girl's voice called out from behind me, "I love you, Mummy!" And I began. When I tried to guide Liz to a favorite memory, she instinctively closed her eyes once more, then immediately reopened them. But there are so many to choose from.
That was hard for me to read, because obviously, like, you're a great doctor and loving, and you're caught up in this moment that you can't help but be caught up in, and yet, like, it's still eggshells, all the way through.
That was gut-wrenching for me to live through. You can imagine that was the slap of reality that I guess I needed in that moment. You can be caught up in that, but you can't forget it's not your family member. Everyone's perspective is different. It's not all the same amongst the people in the room. It's brutal.
Yeah. Yeah, but I appreciate you putting that kind of stuff in the book. That it makes the again, industry is the word that I want to use. It makes
It's
me
field of care.
yes, thank you. Again, I'm a piano teacher. I don't have a big vocabulary. It makes the field of care very real, and it's very human. All the people who are doing this are fallible, and
human.
yeah, right. And
including the people doing the work, including the people who are asking for the work, including the people around them. The purpose, I mean, a real goal of my book was to pull the curtain back and not tell you some made up story. I wanted you to hear what I hear, see what I see, feel what I feel, and try to grapple with what's really happening, because it's complicated, it's emotional, it can be messy, it can be highs, it can be lows. It's all of those things. It's life. It's real, and it's very human, and I wanted to be honest. And I think I was able to do that.
yeah, I think so too. I think it really does a great service to the field, because of I expected it to be more advocate-y of like, here are all the reasons that it's good. Like, that's what I feel like doing. Like, I feel like making a case for this thing that I think I might believe in, but I'm not quite sure.
Right.
And
Yeah.
right. It's just a story about a person who's going through this thing, regardless of whether it's the right thing or the wrong thing. They're doing their best and trying to reduce suffering and have reverence for humanity and reverence for life. And it was just really beautiful in that way.
Thank you.
What are the characteristics that would make someone, well, you at the beginning of your thing, you're in front of the board and you ask them like, what should I know going into this? What do you wish you would have known at the beginning of all this? So what is your answer now to what do you wish, what are the characteristics of a person who would be good at this, and what do they need to know to make sure they don't fall into the same most obvious pitfalls you might have fallen into?
Wow, that's good. I love that. I haven't actually thought about it. Let's see. I think the people who do this work need to be, and I'm surrounded by them, compassionate. They need to be cautious. They need to be caring. They need to be professional. They need to have a certain self-awareness, so they know their own limits, because you can't be everything to everyone all the time. You need to know where and when you need to step back, even if the story is straightforward to someone else. They remind you of Aunt Mabel, who just died last month of the same diagnosis. You probably shouldn't take that case on, right? So I think you need a certain amount of self-awareness. This is controversial. I don't think it's great for people who are fresh out of training to jump into this field. I think for more seasoned clinicians, it's probably a little easier and they have a perspective, but that doesn't mean younger physicians can't do this. So experience, compassion, worldview, the view over the healthcare system. I think, and self, yeah, I think those are the main characteristics of someone who's going to do this work. Ethical, moral upstanding. What do I wish I had known? What would I tell someone? That's good. I'd say it's kind of the same thing. Know the rules. Like, educate yourself. Know the law. Know the guidelines. Know the professional obligations. Know what happens if you break them. And absolutely, without doubt, do not do this on your own. This is not a solo thing. Get the village. It takes a village. Get connected. Other people that do the work, allied health that's involved in this work. Don't do it alone. Never feel you're alone. Always know you can ask someone else if you're not sure. Make sure you have a support system for the work professionally and for yourself personally. Who do you go to if you have a rough day at work? What do you do if you are crushed by something that someone said to you? How are you going to get support? Make sure those things are in place.
It seems like, thanks to Stefanie Green, there are not going to be as many Stefanie Greens in the future, in that you can now see one, do one, teach one.
All right, this is me pretending to be smart. This is not the vocabulary of a piano teacher. Dr. Green taught me in her book that in the medical field, you're supposed to see a procedure, perhaps multiple times, before you ever do one, or maybe several, on your own. And then after you've done that, you're supposed to teach one, or probably a lot of them, in order to test your own knowledge and to pass your knowledge on. So see one, do one, teach one. I'm definitely going to pretend in the future like I am smart enough to have intuited that idea on my own. Also, if you're a Stefanie Green and you're pioneering a new field that has never been seen or done or taught, you must walk carefully and humbly as you map the new terrain for others to navigate in the future.
Whereas when you were going through it, you're the one making that. So it seems like someone who's getting into the field now has a lot more breathing room to ease into it, perhaps, and learn along the way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I recommend that. I've been very involved in training people for the last decade, but now for the last couple of years, we actually have a nationally accredited, comprehensive, like standardized curriculum program. And we encourage people to use that. We encourage people to shadow people, to be precepted by them, to, see one, do one, teach one. There's a stage to do that. Nobody should have to make a big blind step in Canada anymore. And we're happy to mentor people. And different people need different mentoring. Some people need to watch it twice, and some people need to watch it 20 times. That's fine. You learn the way you need to learn.
What is the current, is there more need than there are practitioners, or?
There's sorry to cut you off. There's a strikingly higher demand than we have providers for. So this is a growing problem. We know since 2019, the numbers of people requesting has basically tripled. The number of providers has barely, not quite doubled. We're not keeping up from that sense. What we're seeing are people who are doing, so smaller numbers of people are doing larger amount of work rather than the general population of clinicians doing a little bit of work each. That's what we see in the Netherlands. We see 85% of all assisted deaths done by GPs in the Netherlands. So a lot of people do very little of it. In Canada, we didn't see that. We saw almost the opposite, where very few people are doing a lot of it. And that's not as sustainable. This needs to be exposed. People need to be exposed in nursing and medical school so they come out at least open to the idea and much more able to participate in it in some way that they're comfortable.
Are GPs allowed to do it in Canada and they just choose not to participate?
Yeah, anybody who has a medical license or a nurse practitioner license can do this in Canada. When I first started, I used to call every single, family doc or GP of every patient and see if they would do one of the assessments for eligibility. I'd say probably 80 to 90% of them very politely said no, either because they didn't want to, because they were against it, or because they just didn't understand what would be required of them. Fair enough. It was brand new. I'd say now when I call those doctors, I'd say the flip, probably 80 to 85% will say, oh, sure, I'll do that and do one of the assessments, but they're not doing the provisions. So we've seen a shift, but not enough to support the patients. Yeah.
All right. So the worst conspiracy theorist that lives in my head thinks that MAiD is a detriment to the pharmaceutical industry, and that a doctor might be tempted to have someone stay alive longer subconsciously for keeping them on some kind of billable
service.
Something. Sure. Yeah. Is that any percentage of that real?
Well, no, I work in a universal healthcare system. Docs don't make that much per patient. So I would say that's probably not a good argument in Canada. Although it's true, if you don't have a patient, you don't get paid. That'd be a tough one to make in our system, I'd say.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I'll go with no.
I figured I'd say it out loud. Two last questions here. In my past, my evangelical fundamentalist past, almost the only knowledge that I had about assisted death was Kevorkian, and I was a young kid, and all I knew was that he was a horrible psychopath who did horrible things to people and was obviously not going to get to heaven, and was the worst of our humanity, and needed to be probably exterminated himself. Now I don't know much about the situation, but it seems like maybe there's a possibility that he was the good guy. I'm wondering if he played any role in bringing the issue to light.
I think I've not studied Jack Kevorkian's career. I know a little bit about him. I've seen the movie, kind of thing. I would say that what Kevorkian did that is possibly helpful is that he raised awareness about this topic. He raised awareness that maybe people want some help, that we need to be talking about this. And I think that is a service that he provided by raising the topic in the media and in a big way. I think that the disservice that he did is that he was a lone ranger. He did it knowingly to break the law, purposely to get in front of a judge, in order to make a point, in order to fight the law. And I think he did it in a way that I wouldn't condone anyone ever doing it by breaking the law. I think that is a poor choice. I don't think he's a hero for doing that. And I think that is a detriment to the cause if you want to support the cause. And that is not helpful. So I think he's probably a controversial figure. That'd be my best guess. I don't, like most things, not black, not white. A whole bunch of shades of gray, sometimes shadier this way, sometimes shadier that way.
We had no such things where I came from, so that's fine.
Interesting about shades of gray, though, I would say one of the things I've noticed, and I don't think it's just in Victoria, I think across the country, obviously the church, the whatever church that is, whatever deity it is, whichever crew, is never going to embrace this care, right? There's going to be, like, from the top, there's going to be, this is not okay. That is just against the laws of the church. I don't know how to phrase that, but I think that's pretty clear. What's interesting, though, is that I have found a lot of local faith leaders who have been unwilling to turn their back on their community. And I think that there was a lot of struggle in the early days of what to do with that. And some clearly said, well, I have to follow doctrine and I can't help you. There were some, but I would say there were more. And there are continued to be more and more who will say, the church won't condone this, but I've known you for X many years. You've come to me for support. Obviously, faith is a part of your life. How can I help you? Talk to me. How can I talk to you about afterlife? Tell you what are your fears? What is merciful, what is not. Like, there's a lot of conversations happening and a lot of support happening in some ways that are quite striking. And I've been really, really pleased to see that. And I kudos to those leaders who have the courage and the will to support their flock despite pretty severe doctrine from above.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that might be, and I'm not going to ask you to comment on this, but I'm going to, because of my background. I have great hope for the malleability of the Christian community because, we used to, it was obvious in the Bible that God created everything exactly 6,000 years ago, and there's no other way to read it until, maybe that's not it. It's obvious that, slavery is good until, what we meant was the Bible says the opposite of that. Obviously women shouldn't vote until we think the Bible says the opposite of that. So I wouldn't be surprised at all. I'd be surprised if the church didn't change its position just because it's written in the book. I don't see that that's any hindrance to our ability to reinterpret it when there's enough pressure to do so.
Yeah, but there's literalists and there's reinterpretation. There's always going to be that tension.
Last question. In your book, you list a lot of the last words, and you give a lot of great stories. I didn't hear a lot in there about last regrets. Is that a part of your experience with your clients?
We sometimes talk about that explicitly, usually only if I ask about it. Patients don't often bring that up. That's not true. Sometimes patients do bring that up. I wouldn't say it's a universal. I would say it's a smaller than average proportion of people that want to get into that with me. Depends a little bit on how long I've known them and their circumstances. I don't hear a lot. People don't talk a lot about that. They're more concerned about the here and now. They're very, very focused on the next few weeks and months and how they're going to live or not live or how they're going to die or not die. Sometimes people will spontaneously bring that. I'll tell you what I've never heard. I've never heard anybody say, I wish I worked harder or longer. I've never heard that. I've heard people say they wish they stayed more involved with certain things for longer. But people really do. It sounds cliche. People really, really do just come down to the most important thing for me right now is being able to spend time with my family. If I can do that, I want to stay here. If I can't do that, I want to go. I hear that a lot.
That's interesting. I wonder if it's a self-selecting population that is not grasping at missed opportunities that are more settled with the prospect of not being around anymore that would reach out for MAiD services.
Certainly. It's certainly a self-selected population. When you look at the population, only 4.7% of all deaths in Canada are by MAiD. So it's very, very small, the number of people that will actually choose this. Quite courageous, I would say. It takes a lot to be able to ask for this and a lot more to be able to follow through with it. It's not a simple decision for anyone by any means.
Well, I assume that my mind will change on this multiple times over the next couple of years. So I don't know what the right answers are, but it seems evident to me that your heart is exactly where I would want the heart to be for healthcare workers across the board. So thank you so much for who you are and what you're doing, what you're striving for. I believe in it.
I appreciate it. Thank you for keeping questioning. I think that is the heart to living.
Thank you all for joining me. I think you probably deserve an award for being open to new perspectives. I think Dr. Green deserves an award for her measured tolerance of my ignorance. And I think I deserve something for holding back my opinions to the extent that I did. Hopefully I did not sully her clear-headed and informative episode with my juvenile passion. I have not been holding back in writing my script for A Complete Christian's Guide on the topic. So make sure you're subscribed to get notified when that's released. And here's where I introduce my family to my friends, viewers of If I'm Really Honest. There's an audio podcast that you can take with you on the road. Available, of course, on all the podcast platforms. And if you're an audio-only subscriber, you should know that the YouTube versions of these things have loads of on-screen diagrams and explanations. There are also tons of bonus episodes that are not on the audio-only feed. And then we come to the part of the show where YouTube wants me to emotionally manipulate you into liking and subscribing.
If you could do me a favor and double check if you're a subscriber to this channel, that would be tremendously appreciated, because in a strange way, you're part of our history and you're on this journey with us.
Now, if you're serious about this relationship, hit the follow or subscribe button.
I would love it if you would hit the subscribe. That would really make me feel like I'd matter.
If I'm really honest, that feels icky, and I never like and subscribe when I'm told to. I do really appreciate it when you like and subscribe. As a group, probably not you individually. I mean, maybe you individually if you reached out. Daniel, Jamie, Derek, Drina, Amy, Steve, Tovia, Benjamin, Mary. Many of you I appreciate individually. And all of you I appreciate collectively. And when you click those couple of buttons, it really does help keep this good thing going between us, distant and anonymous as it may be. And when you complete the missions of the superfans, that really does help the channel significantly. But aside from all that yucky marketing and kissing the ring of our digital overlords, I really do think it's helpful when we think of each other as distant cousins. And I really am rooting for all of us to be successful in our highest endeavors, just as surely as I'm hoping that we'll fail where we're misguided. And I really do hope that you're rooting for us too, and including yourself in that. So, be well.